It's time to get the view of Reform UK this morning. Delighted to say joining us now is Zia Yusuf, the former chairman of Reform UK, the head of the party's Doge department. A very good morning to you.
Good morning.
I have to start here because we just mentioned this tweet moments ago that Elon Musk has just tweeted saying, "I regret some of my posts about President real Donald Trump last week. They went too far." Is that, forgive me with a wry smile, saying, is that a sentiment you sort of understand?
I went first. Look, no, look, I'm not a spokesman for Elon Musk, but look, I've been working 11 months with Nigel and an amazing team to build this party pretty much from scratch, pretty much and without a day off. And so I was pretty exhausted, and I sent a tweet that I regretted. But it's great to be back. David Bull's going to be a great chairman, and we've got a huge job to track down and unearth and eliminate wasteful spending and fight for the taxpayer.
Just unpack, I want to get to the spending review in a moment, but since we started here, unpack that for a little bit more for us about why you did step down, temporarily, of course.
Exhaustion, really. As I said, 11 months under a lot of pressure. Very proud, obviously, of what we achieved. Launched 400 branches, quadrupled the size of the membership, went from 14% support to over 30%. And May the 1st, I think, will go down as the most historic set of local election results in this country. And so when you're doing all of that, there was a lot of abuse directed at me on social media, which, look, in the end, that's on me. Politics is a tough game, so not complaining about that. But it was a nexus of those factors that just caused me to, as I said, send an intemperate tweet. But look, the good news is that it was all, I guess one other thing I would say, actually, as I received a huge number, a massive number of lovely, heartfelt messages from Reform supporters, members and voters, telling them that Reform is not just a political party to them. It's a movement, which for them is millions of people in this country, represents this country's last hope. They expressed their view that I was an important part of that and frankly urged me quite declaratively to reconsider. And that's what I did. And I'm really glad to be back with this incredible team. And I'm very confident Nigel will be the next Prime Minister.
I'm really interested, Zia, that you said that the abuse you received in response to the tweet was on you. I mean, sometimes details like that are on the person that made the post initially, but some of the replies you received and in the past have received, I think would be fair to say crossed the line into being racist. Is that on you?
Well, what's on me is the responsibility to, number one, not spend too much time on X, which I definitely was doing. But look, if you enter frontline politics, you know what you're getting into. If you stick your head above the parapet and say, I want to make a difference in this country on the front line in politics, you're going to expect, sadly, to get some abuse. I would also say, look, X is frankly full of bots. There's a lot of bots, and much of the abuse actually was not, just to be clear, coming from Reform supporters anyway.
Which I can understand, but I still think it's just interesting to hear you reflect on receiving racist abuse. From my perspective, that's never excusable, and surely it's not on you, the recipient, whether it's a bot, a Reform supporter, or a supporter of the Pink or whatever party. Surely it should be condemned unequivocally.
Well, of course, I think we can all. I think it's quite straightforward for us all to condemn racism. The question here, your question, though, was about what led to my decision making. I'm a great believer in personal responsibility and people having agency over the decisions that they make. That was my decision to send that tweet, nobody else's. There are other politicians who receive, Lord Nigel himself has received inordinate amounts of abuse for decades. So, look, that's what I mean. The part that is on me are the things that I did. I had agency over that decision. I regret it. I've apologized. I'm glad to be back.
And just to sort of round off that part of it all, could you clarify for us whether burkas should be banned or are okay, and your views towards Sarah Paruchin as well?
I'd be glad to, because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. To address Sarah, she's a phenomenal MP, an amazing person. I was instrumental in selecting her, worked really hard to get her elected all the way through to the count, you might remember. And since then, I've built a fantastic relationship. She's a huge asset to the party and to the Commons. That's the first point. The second point is, I want to be clear. If there was a decision I made there on Twitter, nothing to do with the burqa itself or the question itself. The point is, if I was an MP, which obviously I'm not, I would think very deeply about it. I probably would, though, be in favour of voting for a ban writ large for face coverings in public, not just the burqa, but also the Antifa thugs who, for example, wear masks. I've seen for myself, I saw it firsthand, multiple thugs wearing masks, threatening Nigel, threatening our supporters, and actually attacking one of Nigel's security detail, and no arrests, partly because of the mask. So I probably would be in favour of the ban, yeah.
I'm fascinated by that, and just maybe I'm extrapolating from what you said here, but I'm interested for you to clarify. But somebody wearing a burqa is not the same as a thug with a face covering who's intimidating people. Are you linking the two? I mean, surely they're very, very different circumstances, and you could decide to ban one where people are purposefully intimidating people and not the other.
Yeah, that's true. You could. I'm expressing a view, and it's my personal view. Just to be clear, not party policy, as has been made clear. But my personal view is, I probably would do it to address the burqa itself. I do think this country does have huge issues with assimilation. I don't think that's a controversial statement. I think most people watching this program, politicians don't like talking about it for whatever reason, but it's one reason why I think the social contract in this country is fraying. And I'd also flag that, there are a lot of Muslim majority countries that have banned it, either, again, across the whole of public life or inside government buildings, for example. So, look, the reality is it's a very difficult issue. I'm not saying it isn't. One of the things I'm always uneasy about is if you think about legislation in the UK, is doing things that would be deemed as unconstitutional in the United States, which such a ban almost certainly would be under the First Amendment. But I think this country has very specific challenges. And that's why I said it's a very difficult decision, but I probably would be in favour of banning it, yeah.
Is freedom of expression, obviously, is something I'm sure you still want to protect. Why does peacefully what someone wears come into any sort of government control?
Yeah, look, I think the question you ask is a very good one and strikes at the heart of why, again, this is a very difficult issue. And I do think sometimes distilling things into sound bites is unhelpful. But I want to be really clear. This country does have very specific issues and challenges around assimilation. I think there's a lot of people in this country who would take the view that the burqa itself is an impediment to integration, to public social interaction, and is somewhat antithetical to what people would deem to be British values. You are right, though. Freedom of religion is incredibly important. That's why I said it is a very challenging issue. But I also want to be clear, our view is also that the kind of face coverings that people wear in terms of Antifa masks. And look, we are living in dangerous times now with regards to protests. You're seeing what's happening in America. A lot of the people, again, let's not get into the merits of the protest, and people are absolutely, should be entitled to protest, and that's incredibly important. People have that right. But there are a lot of people now protesting in masks. And in some cases, as I said, I saw somebody being attacked, having a tooth knocked out, one of Nigel's security details, and no arrests were made because those people were wearing masks.
Which is, I know we're dwelling on this, just so it's my final question, and I'm sorry to dwell on the topic so much, but surely that is a separate point, and one can decide to wear a pair of glasses, a baseball cap, a face mask, as we all did during the pandemic, regrettably for so long, or a burqa, and it could be peaceful and completely unrelated to anything intimidating or dangerous.
Yeah, nobody, I think, in public discourse is claiming that the burqa is, quote, unpeaceful. And you are right. And just to be clear, I'm agreeing with you. You could legislate.
But did you not just say, forgive me for interrupting, that it was against British values?
No, because again, I think if you speak to people in the country and you knock on doors and you speak to voters, there is a lot of unease about. And as I said, I think the burqa, not many people in this country actually wear the burqa, but it does represent something that in many people's eyes is against British values. So it is a difficult, but it is.
Why is it against British values?
Because it is an impediment. Because it is an impediment to social interaction. Making eye contact with people is a very human thing, and so people see it absolutely as somewhat emblematic and perhaps even a lightning rod for a lot of the quote unquote assimilation issues that this country faces. And look, it might be awkward to talk about. I get that. It might be uncomfortable to talk about, but these are really important things that we do talk about. And if you don't listen to voters, and there are many people who share the views that I have, and I say this, by the way, as someone who is Muslim, that there are many, many people who share that view. And so if you don't listen to these people and you don't consider it when you're passing legislation, then you end up in a place where we are already, which is where you have a voter base that feels, a population that feels like the social contract is fraying and politicians are simply not listening to them.
It's really fascinating to get your perspective on that, and appreciate you giving us the time on it. Switching focus to the spending review, we just, by the way, got pictures which we can play to our viewers over the top of government ministers arriving for the cabinet. What are you looking out for most of all in the spending review today?
I mean, just hopefully she does the opposite of what she's been doing. I mean, this is Rachel Reeves, and frankly, the whole Labour cabinet is what happens when people with no experience, meaningful experience in the real world, never having achieved anything hard in the real world, not really understanding how the real world works, occupy the highest offices in the land. So let me give you an example. You know, she said that Labour promised not to, quote, raise taxes on working people. What they've done by raising national insurance contributions for employers is put hundreds of thousands of people out of their jobs. North of 250,000 people are no longer working since that budget. And if you look at the chart, it's a clear, direct causal effect from that, no doubt because of the national insurance contribution. We speak to so many businesses who say either they are closing down completely or they are cutting jobs because their margins are so wafer thin in this country. That's the first point. The second point is we have to scrap this net zero project, not because we don't think clean air is important, but because this is a regressive tax on working people, and it is £12 billion a year out of the taxpayers' purse, and it is giving us, as we speak, the most expensive energy costs in the world. And anyone who understands economics knows that you cannot have high growth in terms of an economy and GDP per capita if you have high energy costs. There is not a single example in history of a high growth developed economy growing fast with energy costs like ours. China pays 75% less, the US pays 60% less. So we have to scrap that. We're going to get the opposite. We're going to get more public spending. British taxpayers, people listening to this program, they all feel poorer every year because they are getting poorer every year. Real wages have done nothing for 10 years, and the tax burden on working people is at the highest level since World War II. So what am I expecting? Unfortunately, more of the same.
I just wanted to finish by asking you about Doge and coming back, I guess, a little bit to where we started on Elon Musk. I think it's fair to say that the scale of the spending cuts and savings that he sought to make haven't been realised. Maybe they will in time, but that they've been small compared to, for example, the increase in spending and the deficit in the US that's currently going through Congress. Similarly, what is the scale, do you think, of efficiency savings that there is potential to deliver in the UK? Because we just talked to the Conservatives about it, we talked to Labour about it. I think every party wants to find efficiency savings. Every party wants to deliver greater productivity for the same amount of spending. So I'm sure you'd acknowledge that no government has willfully ignored that over recent years. What percentage of GDP can you find in savings?
I think some governments have willfully done that, but I take your point. So it's one thing having the will, it's another thing having the competence and political will to do it. So if you look, just to address your point about Elon's Doge in America, I think there's a slight conflation of two different issues. I mean, Elon's Doge did identify and cut around a couple of $100 billion, $200 billion of savings. That's not a small amount of money, but obviously Congress passed a bill, much to Elon's frustration, to meaningfully increase spending. That's a particular point about the American Constitution. The founding fathers were very particular to put the purse strings in the hands of Congress and not the executive branch, into which Elon reported. That's not the case in the UK. Reform-controlled councils can make those budgetary decisions and have the executive power to do that. That's really important. And we're going to take this whole process and mission and attitude of spending taxpayer money like it was your own money, of standing up for taxpayers, hopefully all the way to government, where, of course, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, flanked by a majority of MPs, has vastly more power and ability to obviously set budgets and cut spending than the President of the United States. So that's the first point. What we're going to do over the coming months and years is do forensic audits, not just to make sure that the numbers add up and make sure that there isn't more fraud, but also to look at areas where we can make meaningful advances to deliver not just the same services to people, but maybe even a better service at far lower cost. The sorts of things you see in the private sector all of the time. Let me give you an example. Kent County Council, which we visited a couple of weeks ago, last year, by their own admission, there was £2.8 million of fraud. The vast majority of that fraud was inside the so-called mandatory statutory budgets. We're always being told there's no money to be saved, don't bother even looking. It was things like taxi firms submitting invoices for trips that never happened. It was adult social care firms submitting invoices for clients that are sadly since deceased. And it's unclear at this stage how preponderant this is, but we think it is preponderant. We're getting a lot of whistleblowers come forward. So that's the first point. The other point I want to make is procurement. So many of these contracts, I was looking yesterday at multi-million-pound taxi contracts in one of the councils, and this happens everywhere, where there was only one bidder. Only one bidder for a multi-million-pound taxi contract into the council. I put it to you, if you were calling a taxi firm to take you to the airport, you'd probably call a couple, wouldn't you? Maybe even three, and get some quotes. So the taxpayer of this country has been taken for a mug for too long, and we're going to fight for them.
Zia Yusuf, we thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.